Good evening and welcome to this session of Fratelli Fridays, 4 sessions in which we try to understand deeply what Pope Francis is saying in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. We've had 3 sessions already, and this is the 4th and last session in which we conclude and try to draw some conclusions for ourselves. Let's take a brief summary. Fratelli Tutti, its title itself is the message of Jesus encouraging us to recognize one another as brothers and sisters and to live accordingly in the common home that he has entrusted us with. These are words of Pope Francis himself. Pope Francis is obviously inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, and especially his visit to Sultan Malik el-Kamil all the way to Egypt. 800 years ago, imagine, 800 years ago, Saint Francis urged that all forms of hostility or conflict be avoided, and that a humble and fraternal subjection be shown to those who do not share our faith. His vision of a fraternal society is one in which, in his words, only the man who approaches others not to draw them into his own life, but to help them become even more fully themselves, can truly be called a father. And therefore, fraternity does mean we subject ourselves to others in some ways. Like Francis of Assisi, the meeting that Pope Francis had with the Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib in Abu Dhabi has inspired him. And this is the inspiration for this encyclical. But of course it encompasses all the teachings of Pope Francis since the beginning of his pontificate. What is the setting for this encyclical? In responding to the pandemic, Pope Francis says that aside from the different ways that different countries responded to the crisis, their inability to work together became quite evident. Anyone who thinks, therefore, that the only lesson to be learned from the pandemic was the need to improve things that we have already been doing, or to refine existing systems and regulations, is denying reality. Pope Francis is very clear. We can't continue in the way we were. And therefore, we have to work towards this fraternity, social fraternity. A very quick analysis that Pope Francis makes of the situation. He says that almost everything seems to be collapsing in the world today. There is not a progression, but there seems to be a regression. And he identifies several things that we have heard in the previous speakers' presentations. But let me say this part of his analysis. The best way, he says, to dominate and gain control over people is to spread despair and discouragement, even under the guise of defending certain values. Please try to think, where does this apply to us in India? Is he talking about a situation we are facing? He continues, these are his words now. Nowadays, what do certain words like democracy, freedom, justice, or unity, and I would add secularism, really mean? What do they mean? They have been bent and shaped to serve as tools for domination. And in India, we see this. We see in many different spheres these wonderful words being twisted and given a meaning which we would consider derogatory. to serve particular interests of the powerful. And so Pope Francis calls for a better type of politics. Sadly, he says, politics today often takes forms that hinder progress towards a different world. Otherwise, the political establishment should be pushing all of us to something higher, something that will be better for humankind. Number 155 says, lack of concern for the vulnerable can hide behind a populism that exploits them for its own purposes, or a liberalism that serves the economic interests of the powerful. How apt for our country, for the world at large, but you can see examples of this in our world, how economic interests of the powerful are taking control of all our lives. Everything is under this control. And that's why we have such a large number, thousands and thousands of farmers surrounding Delhi protesting against this commercial interest that is seeking to have a stranglehold over the farmers and their lives. And so Pope Francis says politics can degenerate into an unhealthy populism by appealing to the basest and most selfish inclinations of certain sections of our population. And you see this across the world. Nationalism, and especially religious nationalism, seems to be doing this, exploiting the crude instincts that people have. This becomes all the more serious when, whether in cruder or sometimes more subtle forms, we can't even understand, we cannot recognize it, but nevertheless it is there. It leads to the subverting of institutions and laws. All the institutions that we have built up seem to be subverted today. You have so many examples of institutions like the press that we find, or the media that we find has become subservient to some larger interests, not subservient to the truth. And we have laws that have been used against those who dissent. So you have laws like sedition laws, imagine, of the time of the British, anti-terrorist laws even applied to people like Father Stan Swami and intellectuals and social workers. Love jihad, cow slaughter, CAA, all these are laws which trouble us a great deal. And that's exactly what Pope Francis is pointing to. It's happening all over the world, not just in our world, in India. And so we have to look at solutions. So Pope Francis is looking at some solutions in the beginning. He says, helping the poor financially must always be a provisional solution in the face of pressing needs. We in the parish have a lot of this, financial aid and different types of help to people who are financially in trouble. But the Pope says the broader objective should always be to allow them a dignified life through their own labor. And that's what we have to work towards. Emergency measures are needed, but what do we need to work towards? To give dignity to every human person. And therefore, grassroots popular movements of the disadvantaged, of the unemployed, of those who feel that they are being exploited, these help us to realize that our social policies are often for the poor, but never with the poor or of the poor, much less a part of the project that unites all people or reunites them. And therefore, this analysis is that not everything that we do for others by way of charity is really the ultimate solution. An interim solution, yes, but not the ultimate solution. And therefore, Pope Francis exhorts us, we can start from below and case by case act at the most concrete and local levels of our society, and then expand to the further reaches of the country and even of the world, with the same care and concern that the Samaritan showed to each wound of the traveler, beaten up. We always come to that parable of the Samaritan that Pope Francis sees as so applicable to today's world. And therefore, the need for a new kind of politics. This is now really what the solution is. For many people today, politics is a distasteful word, often due to the mistakes, the corruption, the inefficiency of some politicians. Politics has become anathema. We don't want to do anything with that. And yet, where individuals can help others in need, when they can join together in initiating social processes of fraternity and justice for all, they then enter the field of charity at its most vast, namely political charity. What Pope Francis is saying is that politics cannot be an untouchable. On the contrary, when we work for the good of others, we are actually exercising charity at its zenith, political charity. And this entails working for a social and political order whose soul is social charity. So political charity is really social charity, charity that we do to our neighbors and to the world at large. It is an act of charity to assist someone suffering. We all know that. When you see someone, individual, suffering, it's an act of charity to reach out to that person. But it is also an act of charity, even if we do not know that person, to work to change the social conditions that caused his or her suffering. Let's go back to the parable of the Good Samaritan, because a senior colleague of mine, Father Rudy Heredia, had an extension to that parable that I think is quite interesting. He spoke about the Samaritan, so different from the Judean who had been beaten up and left for dying. And yet he takes him to the inn, he leaves money there, then he goes about his business. He comes back to the inn, pays off all what is required, and then he does one more thing which the parable from the Gospel does not tell us. On his way back now, he's free. So he actually goes in search of the robbers. Imagine, because the robbers are also a victim of the system. Nobody will be able to brutalize another unless they themselves feel brutalized. And so he went in search of them. He tries to find out what are the social conditions that engender these groups of robbers. And then he tried to convert them, tried to get them away from this very inhuman activity. That's the type of Good Samaritan that we need today, don't you think? A very nice extension of this parable. Pope Francis therefore goes on to say, how do we reach this type of solution? He talks about social dialogue for a new culture. We have to build a new society and a new culture. Remember, the pandemic has taught us this. We can't continue as we are. So we have to search for new ways, and this, he says, is through social dialogue. A country flourishes when constructive dialogue occurs between its many rich cultural components. Most countries, and India is eminently in this situation, most countries have a variety of people, different cultures, making up a whole, a unity. Now, the dialogue between these different cultures is very important. Authentic social dialogue, Pope Francis says, involves the ability to respect the other's point of view and to admit that perhaps it is legitimate. And those convictions and those concerns need to be taken into account. They didn't occur to us. It's coming from another party. And normally we would tend to reject it. But Pope Francis is saying, no, respect for the other, for my brother and sister, means that I need to consider his or her concerns too. To speak of a culture, therefore, of encounter. That's what we need today, a culture of encounter. This means that we as a people should be passionate about meeting others, not others of our own kind only. All peoples from the larger community, seeking points of contacts, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. This is what this culture of social dialogue is all about, a culture of encounter. We have to go out of our normal lives, our serene lives which we are used to, and seek to meet each other, meet others. This becomes an inspiration and a style of life. And the subject of this culture is the people, not simply one part of society that would pacify the rest with the help of professional and media resources. So he says this is what seems to be happening. One part of society tries to pacify the rest and keep them down. No, we need an encounter, a respectful encounter. And so now, in the last two chapters, the Pope goes on to talk about paths of renewed encounter. That's chapter 7. It calls for reconciliation in the midst of conflict. We have to acknowledge that there is a lot of conflict in our lives and in the world. And what we require today is reconciliation. Forgiveness, he says, is universally promoted by all religions. Every religion talks about forgiving someone else. Yet, there is a risk that an inadequate understanding and presentation of these profound convictions of forgiveness, reconciliation, can lead to fatalism, apathy, further injustice, and even intolerance and violence, because then finally you burst forth. And so we need to understand what forgiveness and reconciliation is all about. Pope Francis says in 241, those who suffer injustice have to defend strenuously their own rights and those of their family. If there is an injustice being perpetrated, we have to oppose it, precisely because we must preserve the dignity that we have received as a loving gift from God. And therefore we have to oppose injustice. For example, if a criminal, Pope Francis says, has harmed me or a loved one, no one can forbid me from demanding justice and ensuring that this person will not harm me or anyone else again. Justice is important. This is entirely just. Forgiveness does not forbid it, but actually demands it. These are the words of the encyclical. So we have to understand what reconciliation and forgiveness is all about. It doesn't mean not pursuing justice. The important thing, however, is not to fuel anger. If we are adding fuel to the fire, to the anger within, through seeking justice, we have gone down the wrong path. And therefore, we have to understand better that dialogue and seeking justice go hand in hand. Pope Francis then goes on to two very important points that I won't dwell in detail, but it's all well known, and that is war and the death penalty. in our Christian thinking, we had always justified some types of war. In fact, we called it a just war. Pope Francis says, no type of war now can be justified. We always have to seek peace. And similarly, with individuals, if an individual has harmed us, seeking the death penalty for that person goes against the human dignity that God has given that person. And so, no to the death penalty. So these are changes in our understanding of our faith, or what God is saying to us, what the Spirit is inspiring us with. On the contrary, therefore, the Pope says that we need to look for reconciliation, forgiveness, and peace. And finally, his last point is the role of religion. Religions at the service of fraternity. The Church, while respecting the autonomy of political life, does not restrict her mission to the private sphere. This is very often we understand religion as being in the private sphere. On the contrary, the Pope says, the Church cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world, or fail to reawaken the spiritual energy that can contribute to the betterment of society. There is a spiritual energy that we bring to the world, and the Church cannot say, oh, I will not deal with politics. I will not enter into this realm. It is true, the Pope acknowledges, it is true that religious ministers must not engage in party politics. That is the proper domain of the laity. But neither can religious ministers renounce the political dimension of life itself. Decisions of public policy impact the community, and we cannot, ignore those or keep ourselves separate. We have to involve ourselves in public policy, because it involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for integral human development. The Church, in fact, the Pope says, has a public role over and above her charitable and educational activities. We cannot just keep to our education and our charity. The Church works for the advancement of humanity and of universal fraternity. And how do we do this then? The Church esteems the ways in which God works in other religions. Now he comes to, once again, an understanding of social fraternity. Other religions are also at work in making the world better. And so the Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for their manner of life and conduct, their precepts and doctrines, which often reflect a ray of truth which enlightens men and women. Others drink from other sources. Other religions drink from their own sources. For us, the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is the gospel of Jesus Christ. From it there arises, for Christian thought and for the action of the Church, the primacy given to the relationship with every human being, to the encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, not just another Christian, another, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation for all. We all share this vocation. The vocation of dealing with one another as brothers and sisters. And so, one fundamental human right must not be forgotten in this journey towards fraternity and peace, and that is religious freedom for believers of all religions, something that is challenged in our world today. That freedom proclaims that we can build harmony and understanding between different cultures and religions. This is the truth we have to search for and achieve. It also testifies to the fact that since the important things we share are so many, it is possible to find a means of serene, ordered, and peaceful coexistence, accepting our differences and rejoicing that as children of the one God, we are all brothers and sisters. My friends, that therefore is what the Pope is encouraging us. He finally concludes with, it follows that we believers of different religions need to find occasions to speak to one another and to act together for the common good and the promotion of the poor. This has nothing to do with watering down or concealing our deepest convictions when we encounter others who think differently from ourselves. For the deeper, stronger, and richer our own identity is, the more will we be capable of enriching others with our own contribution. So, my friends, this encounter, this dialogue, this culture that we have to build is something that each one of us have to be involved in. So let me leave you with two sentences from the encyclical, which I found was really very interesting. In number 31, early in the encyclical, he says, "It is one thing to feel forced to live together, but something entirely different to value the richness, the beauty of those seeds of common life that need to be sought out and cultivated." So we are all forced to live together, and somehow we manage. And that's not our vocation. Our vocation is to seek out the richness in the other, which will go to the common good. And finally, number 77 says, we should not expect everything from those who govern us, from the government. Don't expect all the initiatives that need to be taken will be taken by the government, for that would be childish. Very strong language. Don't expect the government to do everything. That's being childish. We have the space we need for co-responsibility in creating and putting into place new processes and changes. That's what Pope Francis confronts us with, our own responsibility, co-responsibility, not alone, but with our brothers and sisters, with the government. We have to also participate in the democratic process. My friends, in the last few months during the pandemic, our parish has been looking to discover Jesus in the domestic church, in our homes and colonies. It has been seeking to work for interreligious dialogue and sensitivity, building bridges with people of other faiths. And it has been looking to enlarge our understanding of charity, not just giving of our time and our money, but really working for justice issues, looking at the larger picture and involving ourselves in the discussion, the democratic process of what is the policy that our country and our world needs. We have been doing this on the environment, we have been doing this on different justice issues, and this is our calling. And you see confirmation from Fratelli, Tutti. Let's ask the Spirit to truly inspire us to take this movement further of working to build a brotherhood and sisterhood of all human beings, knowing that we are in a common home and we are children of the one Father. That's our goal. May the Fratelli Fridays that we have been participating in help us in this process. Thank you for your participation, and let's pray that God will bless richly our efforts.